What's happening, y'all? It's your boy Red coming out of Northwest Detroit, ready to blaze some trails and throw some bows for the boys in rouge and the gals in gold. Welcome to this new segment, this special segment, this video segment of the 451 podcast. You know, I wanted to launch something a little bit new for the show and just get an opportunity to kind of engage different topics at times, and this seemed to be like a good topic or a good time to kind of launch that. Today I wanted to talk about our supporter base and being a basically a white anti-racist ally of the city of Detroit. There's been a lot of things going on in this country lately, and that has been sweeping the nation's uprisings in multiple cities that are a cry for justice as it relates to inequities, racial inequities in our criminal justice system. And of course, this is something that definitely touches close to home here in Detroit. For those of you, I'm sure everybody knows that's watching this, those uprisings have been in response to another string of police brutality. You know what I mean? There's the George Floyd situation, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. You know, these aren't isolated situations. These happen all the time. Some might think that this is kind of a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, but for our black brothers and sisters who might be watching or listening, you know that there's no resurgence. This is your life. This has been going on for some time. It might just be in some ways, maybe an awakening of white America to some of the things that you've been talking about for years, for generations, and hopefully, but unfortunately, probably true that for many this is just going to be a fad, right? It's just it's going to come and go, and the Facebook filters are going to change. You know what I mean? The tweets are going to be a little bit different. You know, the posts are going to be a little bit different. You know, the signs are going to change. You know what I mean? The next sexy thing is going to come. You know, there's an unfortunate reality of kind of, from my perspective, like hipsterism, kind of gentrifying social justice at times. And you have a lot of people who aren't engaged in this work on a regular basis, then jumping in now and pledging support. I want to be hopeful of what that means, but unfortunately I've seen time and time again that become kind of a sexy thing, and then it kind of it wears out. But I'm more hopeful this time than I have been in previous times, given so much things going on. So, one of the things that I think is worth us talking about is related to how this is all folded out locally. For those of us who are part of the supporter base of Detroit City FC, Detroit City FC, we have to acknowledge that Detroit City FC is a club that is dedicated to the city of Detroit, right? It was birthed out of the Detroit City Football League, which was a community organizing effort that was intended to illuminate and connect and uplift neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. It was a recreational soccer league, and out of that, the 5 original owners met and started to plant the seeds to extend off of that and build the Detroit City Football Club, and that's what we enjoy today. It was an amateur club that is now has a professional men's side that we're launching a amateur women's side. We've got various youth affiliates, but as those of us who've been intimately involved in this club in recent years, it's still a new club for the most part. Know that, right? It's never been just about sports. It's never been just about soccer. As supporters of this club, we are supporters of the community that it represents, and so we have to be honest about some of those dynamics that exist with that. And one of the things that exists with that is that as a club that represents the city of Detroit, a large portion, I will say the majority of the supporter base for this club are white folks, and a large portion, a majority of the portion, I would even say, of the supporters of this club come from outside of the city of Detroit in the broader metropolitan region. Nothing wrong with any of that piece, right, in terms of the demographics, except for the fact that we need to do a better job of engaging our black brothers and sisters here in the city of Detroit and connecting them to the club. And I think that the front office is doing a great job with their with their spheres of influence and what they can do. I think that as supporters, we could do actually a better job in that area. I think that's one of those areas where we can actually follow the lead of the front office. But one of the things why that is relevant relates to some of the recent demonstrations. For those of you who have been connected to me in social media know that I've expressed some discontent with how the demonstrations here in the city of Detroit have panned out at times, right? Now, let me be clear that I support the demonstrations that are happening here in Detroit. I think we're going into 2 weeks straight of demonstrations. You've got brothers and sisters here from our city that are coming together to raise their voices and address their concerns and wanting to see some reform with our public safety and our law enforcement, and some just general discontent as well with the criminal justice system. And also, what's also wrapped up into that as well is a general discontent for the racial inequities that exist within the city and the broader region that we're seeing surface within these demonstrations as well. I have nothing against that. I support it 100%. I've been doing that for almost all of my adult life is being a community organizer, sometimes organizing these rallies myself. I've actually, in the distant past, 15 plus years ago, actually have organized with some of the people who were initially leading the demonstrations here in Detroit. I also am wholly supportive of brothers and sisters outside of the city. And then, of course, brothers and sisters who look like me who want to support the black community. I'm 100% down for that solidarity. You know what I mean? That's not a bad thing. But I think that there's been times where that's been a little bit misguided. I've been critical of people's perspective coming into those demonstrations with a kind of an ACAB approach, right? All cops are bastards, right? Or kind of a similar sentiment to what NWA expressed of F the police, right? And this sentiment that there's no good cops at all. And on one hand, I can understand for our black and brown brothers and sisters if they have experienced profiling and traumatic situations with law enforcement where they were treated unfairly, or lost people in their lives that were treated unfairly, whether that be friends and family, how somebody would arrive to that perspective of F the police, you know what I mean? And I think that there are a lot of police who, at least I'm going to speak in terms of Detroit Police Department, who completely understand that sentiment as well. And I'll get to that in terms of some of my discontent with that approach. There are a few things that pop up that concerned me about that approach when it comes from people outside of the city coming into the city, and also white folks coming in, whether they're from the city or not, coming into those demonstrations with that kind of rhetoric. And I'll share with you some things that are on my mind related to that. Some that I've articulated very well in these conversations, some that I might not have articulated as well. But one of the things that I think is important to understand right on the front end are basic in-group, out-group dynamics as it relates to relations to the city of Detroit. One is in-group, you live in the city. Out-group, you don't live in the city, as it relates to Detroit Police Department. Another in-group, out-group, white folks, black folks, or black folks and non-black folks, really, is what it is, right? In-group, out-group, right? This is an issue that is particularly of concern for our black community here in Detroit. That's the in-group, you know what I mean? Whether you're in the city or out of the city, you know what I mean? If you're working as an ally, if you're supporting them, but it's an out-group, in-group, out-group dynamics. Here's a few reasons why I think it's very misguided for folks to come in with this all cops are bastards approach to a demonstration like that in the city of Detroit. One, we're in the middle of COVID-19 global pandemic, right? To the extent that we've been on lockdown for like 3 months. DPS, Detroit Public Schools, has been out of school for a couple months now. There's a lot of young black boys and girls who aren't in school right now. A lot of them are finding themselves at those demonstrations, right? And some of them are at those demonstrations when the lights go out at night. And when you have people, whether you're from in the city or out of the city, when you're coming into those demonstrations with this confrontational and this very provocative approach as it relates to public safety, that's putting those children in danger. We saw situations where there certainly are people, there are protesters. Let me be clear. The overwhelming majority of the protesters that showed up for those demonstrations are there for peaceful means. They want to raise their voice. They don't have to raise their voice in a civil manner. You know what I mean? You can say that however you want. You know what I mean? But the overwhelming majority of the people there were there for peaceful reasons. And I can tell you for sure that the overwhelming majority of Detroiters who were in those didn't want to see damage happening to businesses and vandalism, and that was happening. You had people coming from outside of the city, some intentionally to create chaos, and some that might have just been gassed up, that were kind of putting fuel on the fire. You know what I mean? So you say that you're ACAB, well, let's mess around and find out, and then you come into the city with that rhetoric. And the intention for a lot of folks was really to provoke public safety, or provoke the law enforcement, right? We already know how this happens. This happens all the time, right? You provoke the situation, and then unfortunately the police might bite on that provocation, and then they respond in the way that folks can then say, see, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, but you provoked it as well. You know what I mean? I'm not saying they should respond that way, and I'm not even condoning it, but you know what I mean? We have to have some self-accountability here. If we want the police to have self-accountability, we have to have self-accountability as well. And as somebody who has actually organized rallies like this, if I know that there's a significant amount of young boys and girls coming to those rallies, their safety is of utmost importance. So I'm going to do what's pragmatic and not provoking a situation that could turn violent, right? And so that's where I take a big piece of exception, in terms of if you're coming from outside of the community into Detroit with that provocative approach, and if you're white coming into that demonstration with that provocative approach, and the backlash is largely not going to be against you, right? The backlash in terms of the tarnished relations is going to come down on our black brothers and sisters, and those young kids that are actually in the demonstrations as well. I take exception to that. First and foremost, I'm going to be there for the kids. Red loves the kids. Another piece that concerned me as well is that folks coming from outside of the city, and some within the city, who haven't actually been engaged in building these relations over the years, had no understanding of the prior history of relationships and what was being done to build those relationships, equitable relationships between DPD and black and brown communities in the city of Detroit, right? There were people who were at the rallies. I was actually a part of a group that came in one night just to be a peaceful presence at the request of a local pastor who has been involved in organizing this stuff for years, and also whose family member, is part of an organization that does exactly that, works with the youth to promote peace and promote nonviolence, that were standing in between police and protesters, you know what I mean, and being just a peaceful presence. You had a lot of police officers who are part of Detroit Police Department, who young adults, some maybe not young anymore, but black brothers and sisters, a part of the force, who joined the force because they had negative experiences with DPD when they were younger, or law enforcement in general, and wanted to join the force in order to be an agent of change within the force and be an agent of change within their community. Anybody who has lived in the city, I guess outside of downtown, midtown, that 7.2, and a few other gentrified areas that might not be hit as hard by crime, understands that there's a complicated relationship with local law enforcement, but there's a general sentiment that they definitely are needed. It's just that the ones that aren't acting appropriately, and those covering for those not acting appropriately, they need to go. I think that people can live fluidly within that paradox there. So there are a lot of brothers and sisters in the force who are part of that change. I've been a part of a lot of conversations. I've observed a lot of conversations in terms of the difficulty it is for them to be an agent of change within that. And so when you have those brothers and sisters there to monitor demonstrations and make sure they remain peacefully, and then you have folks from outside of the city coming in and telling those folks to basically F the police and creating a provocative and confrontational and dangerous situation for those police officers that have actually taken on the sacrificial approach to activism by actually sacrificing their lives to be a part of something that they want to see changed, then I take exception to that, because it's very easy to come in and stir the pot and put fuel on the fire to start some stuff and then bounce back to Plymouth or wherever it is. You know what I mean? I remember in one of my exchanges on social media, somebody who was taking exception to me calling out one of our supporter groups, who was taking just that approach, that even when I explained to them that we have brothers and sisters in law enforcement who joined the force to be an agent of change, they said, I didn't ask, don't care. It didn't take much research for me to find out that they're from Plymouth. So you're coming in and you're lighting the fire on a demonstration here in Detroit related to our law enforcement, but then you're safely over there in Plymouth, which is a city where, I've got family and friends that are black that don't feel comfortable driving through that city because of how they've been profiled by public safety there. So take that rhetoric to your own police department, right? And begin to be an ally by expanding the comfort zone and the equitable playground that we all should be able to navigate. So, that was something that I saw. I saw even the leadership of another supporter group, a part of our base, initially I engaged, the Keyworth casuals on this issue, based off of something they said. And, unfortunately, I didn't get any engagement back from them. Then I got the leadership from Rouge Vendetta to try to step in and defend them, Again, it's somebody who, doesn't live here, is not from here, doesn't really understand the local dynamics of what's going on in this city specifically related to that, This is somebody who they themselves had, even in the short time that I've known them, a history of a provocative relationship with law enforcement, in other cities, So don't come here stirring that stuff up. So I think that that's stuff that we need to think about in terms of if you're supporting this club and you're supporting this club in a way that acknowledges and honors that it is an extension of the city of Detroit. And so as supporters of the club, we're supporters of the community. There's a certain level of responsibility that comes with that. And there's a certain level of awareness that we need to carry with ourselves of the dynamics that relate to being an ally and supporting the city, a city that is predominantly black, being supported by a group that supports a club, right? That the group is, this base of supporters are predominantly white and from outside of the city, It's really easy in these conversations to get wrapped up in our feelings, right? And to get defensive. I was accused, I think somebody, one of the leaders of the supporter group of Rouge Vendetta, subtweeted me and called me a bootlicker from Detroit. Why? Because, as somebody who lives here and who doesn't just live here and stay in a house, but is actively engaged in my community. And I don't say that to get a pat on my back, but that's just the reality of it. That part of that process of being engaged with the community, right, is developing relationships with your local law enforcement for the source of protection for your community, right? It's not about being anti-authority and just blindly being against your law enforcement, right? They're there to protect us, and they do a fairly good job. I mean, there's also issues with response times and things like that, but that's a deeper issue beyond just some bad cops, right, or bad management, there's a resource issue that's going on there, and that, at the end of the day, that's people chiming in and piping into issues that they know nothing about. right? It's okay if you don't know anything about that, but don't try to front. Don't try to front like you do, right? And then try to jump on this sexy wave of activism, right? Because of everybody else is doing it, right? And then you jump into relations in a community that you're not part of, and you try to act like you're being an ally, but you're actually having a negative impact on that, or you're speaking from a very detached place, So I think these are things that we really need to think about as a supporter base if we're going to be committed to the community through our club, that these are just honest conversations that we have to have with ourselves. I've been a huge advocate since I've been a part of this club and supporting this club of us finding ways to build intentional relationships with black businesses. It didn't take this movement for me to begin to support black businesses. I've been advocating for gatherings of supporters, to take place at black businesses here in Detroit, and finding ways to intentionally to roll out the carpet and say, like, you're welcomed here. We want you here. We want you involved. And I've had moments where I've been engaged in those conversations, and I've been met with the sentiment of, we don't chase anybody down. We don't chase anybody down. People need to step up and take that on, right? So it's the whole idea of, like, folks need to come to us. No, not when you are a supporter base, that is geared towards supporting your community. You need to be intentionally in the space of the community that you're supporting. You can't expect the community to continue to come to you. We do that in other ways, right? We roll out the carpet, in terms of creating a place, creating a space that is supportive. A good example is, traditionally during the month of June, it's Pride Month, So the supporter base, the front office, there's a whole community that rolls out the carpet to let our brothers and sisters know in the LGBTQA, community, that this is a place that you can feel safe, right? You can feel safe in this space. And we go above and beyond to make sure people know that, as we should. Folks should feel safe. Nobody's, Well, I'm not saying nobody's against that. Obviously, there are people who are against that, strangely enough, but shouldn't be, against supporting folks' safety and well-being in that regard. We can do the same thing, for our black brothers and sisters here in the city of Detroit. We can be very intentional, like, stop being so detached, And this is an example of a situation that occurred in some of the discourse, that went back and forth amongst brothers and sisters within the supporter base, that illuminated maybe a huge blind spot that is present within the dominant culture of our supporter base. So this is something that, as somebody, the person who launched the 451 podcast, the primary reason why I launched the 451 podcast was not to just have a podcast, but I really wanted to be intentional about supporting and nurturing the community-oriented components of our club, right? To reinforce the relationship between the club and the community of Detroit, okay? And I'm hoping that not only have I been able to work collaboratively with brothers and sisters on that project, to illuminate people who are already in our community of Detroit City FC, but also make that connection to how it relates to the city of Detroit and some of the opportunity that we have as a supporter base, as a club that has a significant amount of attention and leverage. So I just think that I wanted to bring that up, for us to begin to think and maybe have a deeper conversation about what it really means to be white anti-racist allies, right? Because that's really where we're at, with this supporter base. We have a lot of people, right? A lot of brothers and sisters, I could say overwhelmingly not racist, right? Overwhelmingly not racist. I have come across a few people where, I'm not sure, They, sometimes, they might have a little something inside them, And I certainly have come across plenty of people who are not racist, but still feel very uncomfortable being around black folks in particular, and probably brown folks as well. And then, of course, you know what I mean, I don't want to act as if everybody within the supporter base is white, right? We do have many people of color, brothers and sisters, who are part of our supporter base, you know what I mean? But we have to be honest with ourselves that that it is predominantly white, and there are things that we need to continue to work on, you know, not for the sake of having a pretty paint job, but actually to develop a more sufficient a more efficient, I should say, engine to everything that we're doing. You know what I mean? By really making sure the right people are at the table to have conversations about how we can maximize this supporter base to do good in the community. And in order to do that, you really have to have the community at the table. You know what I mean? And have it accurately reflected in many ways. So anyway, that's all I have to say. I hope y'all enjoyed this segment of 451, and you know, I hope to bring some more of these things to you. You know, just know that, you know, this is all coming from a place of love and a place that desires to maximize the most that we have with this community. I'm not, I mean, I am here to make friends, but I'm, you know what I mean, I'm never going to sacrifice speaking truth to the situation. And, you know, I ruffle feathers all the time, not for the sake of ruffling feathers, but for the sake of, like, I'm going to speak truth, you know what I mean? I'm going to speak truth to some situations, you know what I mean? So, especially when it has to do with the city that I love. And I know that many of you love the city as well, and many people want to get involved right now. I had a... let me close with this. There was, you know, a sister who I got a chance to meet who has been a practitioner in racial equity in this community for years, right? Lauren Hood. Some of you might have come across her at times. I got a chance to meet Lauren and connect with her when she was doing some stuff with the Live Six Alliance. I don't know Lauren very well, but I've admired her work, and I've admired her commitment to the community, and I've admired her approach, her balance between having grace but also speaking truth, and having the skills and the ability to know how to constructively move forward and make fundamental community change. But she said something that I came across on Facebook just today, actually, that was people keep asking her, what can they do to help? And she challenged people to think about what they can be, not what they can do, right? Because when you talk about what can I do to help, it tends to be a fad. It tends to be a trend, you know what I mean? This is like, you know, let me just donate some money to this organization or that organization. And I'm not saying don't do that, right? That's definitely, I think those organizations could use the support in that way as well. But think more about how you can be, you know what I mean? What you can be in terms of anti-racism, you know what I mean? And that's a whole nother long conversation, you know what I mean, that I'm more than willing to have with folks, you know what I mean? I'm somebody who's been working with, as an anti-racist educator for years. I've been doing a lot of racial justice community organizing, going back to my years in the, you know, at Central Michigan and Mount Pleasant community and Isabella County, and, you know, doing some state organizing on various things. So, you know, I have a good wealth of experience in that area, but, you know, I'm also, you know, I don't know it all, you know what I mean? And I have stuff that I'm consistently working on. So, but I want to just at least open that up for those of you who are interested. If not, you know what I mean, you don't vibe with me, that's fine. You know, my goal is just to, you know, encourage people to get engaged in a sustained and authentic way, you know what I mean, to be supportive of our black brothers and sisters here in the city of Detroit. So that's all I got to say. Love y'all. Take care. God bless.
Please watch the sheep, those are out for the kill, and they won't stop at anything. They've got to get their meals. Oh, shepherd, please watch the sheep, those are out for the kill, and they won't stop at anything. They've got to get their meals. Yeah, how I feel, I tell you how I feel. I tell you how I feel because I got to keep it